Alright, so this video covers basically what the last 5 or 6 videos have been leading up to, and that is the Ricardian Trade model. And so I'm going to go ahead and get right to the punchline of it, which is that Ricardo said that countries should specialize in producing the good or goods that they have a comparative advantage in, and then they should trade those goods for everything else that they want. So he came to this by thinking about specialization of labor, by thinking about that some countries are naturally better at producing some goods than others just because they're in a different place in the world, they have a different workforce, they have different skills, they have a different history, you name it. There are reasons that some countries are better at producing some things than others. And so he said, given that this is the case, we should have open trade, and we should let those countries that are best at making, say, fish, for example, make fish, and then the other countries can make potatoes and trade for the fish that they want, and everyone will be better off. And so we're going to go ahead and show that graphically and numerically, and hopefully that'll make sense. So imagine that there are two countries in the world, my kingdom and your kingdom, and there are only two goods in the world. There are fish and there are potatoes. So in 1 year, I can produce 100 fish or 100 potatoes. My kingdom is right by the ocean, and we also have a bunch of fertile farmland. So depending on where I put my labor, I can make either 100 fish or 100 potatoes. So I've gone ahead and drawn my production possibilities curve over here, and labeled it me. And then your kingdom's a little bit smaller, you're just getting started, and the sea is a little bit farther away. So you can only produce 25 fish, or you can produce 50 potatoes. So I've gone ahead and drawn your production possibilities curve here, and just for your reference, one line is 20 units. So this 25 up here is just a little bit above this first notch. And then 50, of course, is 2 notches and a half notch. Alright, so the questions that we want to answer are who should produce what, who should trade what, and at what price, or better yet, within what price range. Because Ricardo didn't determine an actual exact price, but he determined a price range. So to go ahead and get started, we already have this clue that countries should specialize in the goods that they have a comparative advantage in. So let's go ahead and just figure out who has the comparative advantage in what. So for me, the opportunity cost of producing one fish is equal to 1 potato. And we can go ahead and see that either on the graph here, that if we go down 1 unit, we go over 1 unit, or we can go ahead and see that I have the option to produce 100 fish in a year or 100 potatoes in a year. So obviously 1 fish, if I choose to produce 1 more fish, I sacrifice 1 potato. And vice versa. So we'll go ahead and do that later. So now for you, the opportunity cost of 1 fish is equal to, if you produce 1 fish, that's 2 potatoes, right? Because if you go down, or if you go up 1 here, you sacrifice 2 potatoes, 2 over here. And so let's go ahead and, you know what, let's back up a second and we'll do that a little bit more clearly. So for you, in 1 year, you have either 25 fish or 50 potatoes. Potatoes. So the opportunity cost of 1 fish, let's go ahead and divide this by 25. The opportunity cost of one fish is 2 potatoes. So I'm going to go ahead and write over here that I have the comparative advantage in fish. Alright? Good. So now we need to go figure out who has the comparative advantage in producing potatoes. And so for me, we can just go ahead and flip this and say that my opportunity cost of 1 potato is equal to 1 fish. And that's easy enough to see because I have the option of 100 or 100 up here. So what about for you? Well, we can go ahead and do the same thing actually and just flip this right here. and say that for you, 2 potatoes is equal to 1 fish in terms of resources, in terms of how much time it takes. So you can just go ahead and divide by 2 on both sides and say that 1 potato is equal to half a fish. So your opportunity cost of 1 potato is half a fish. So you have the comparative advantage in potatoes, right? Because for me, I have to sacrifice an entire fish to make a potato, but you only have to sacrifice half a fish. So you have the comparative advantage in potatoes. Comparative advantage in potatoes. Alright? So moving on, we now are going to answer the question to who should produce what. Well, I'm going to go say that I should produce fish because of this Ricardian model, and it kind of just makes intuitive sense too. And you should produce potatoes. And I'm going to prove to you that this will make us both better off later, but for now just take it on faith. So I should trade you, the next question, who should trade what and at what price? So I should trade you fish for potatoes. Potatoes. Alright? Because I have the comparative advantage in fish and you have the comparative advantage in potatoes. And so the last part, and this is where it gets really interesting, is that at what price? So let's go ahead. No, I need to be able to see all of this, so we won't go scroll down. So the last thing that Ricardo said is that you should trade in between the range of comparative advantages. So you should trade, in this example, fish at a price in between, or not in between the range of comparative advantages, but in between your opportunity costs. In between the nation's opportunity costs. And here's the intuition behind it. If you told me, hey, I'll give you a potato, but I'm going to charge you 1.5 fish for it, I'd say, yeah, you know what? 1 potato only costs me 1 fish to produce, so I'll just go ahead and produce my potato domestically. That's cheaper than trading you 1.5 fish for it. Same thing goes for you. If I said, hey, I want to give you a fish, and I'm going to charge you 3 potatoes for it, you'd say, I'd rather just produce it domestically because it only costs me 2 potatoes I only have to sacrifice 2 potatoes to produce it in my kingdom. So we're going to go ahead and trade in between the price of in between our opportunity costs. So let's go ahead and say that we are trading fish. Alright, and we'll change to a blue because we're talking about the ocean. Okay, so we're talking about the market for fish. Well, for me, the opportunity cost of 1 fish is equal to 1 potato. And for you, the opportunity cost of 1 fish is 2 potatoes. So how about this? I will make you a deal and say that I will trade you 2 fish for 3 potatoes, or 1 fish for 1 fish, sorry about that, 1 fish for 1.5 potatoes. Alright? So let's do a little more hypothesizing. Let's say that I choose to produce all fish. So I produce all fish. Only fish. And you produce only potatoes. potatoes. So I have 100 fish, and you have 50 potatoes. All right? So now let's go ahead and see what happens if I trade you. I will go ahead and trade you 20 fish, trade you 20 fish for 30 potatoes. So if I trade you 20 fish, I now have 80 fish. So I have, let's back up there, I have 80 fish because I subtracted 20 from this 100. So I have 80 fish and 30 potatoes. And this is what is cool about this entire thing. So I now, because of trade, I have 80 fish and 30 potatoes. So where am I on my production possibilities curve? Well, 80 fish is right here, and 30 potatoes is out here. So this should go right through the axis, and this should be 10 more potatoes than I could produce. So I could only produce 80 fish and 20 potatoes, this point right here, and I'll use a different color. So I could only produce 80 fish and 20 potatoes domestically, but because of trade, I have expanded my production possibilities curve. And because I've expanded my production possibilities curve, what that means is that I can consume more. I am richer. So I'm richer for trade. And that's because of this point right here in light blue. This guy right here. I've expanded my production possibilities curve by trading. So you might say, well, you know what? You did that, but you only did that because you're screwing me over. I haven't gotten any richer for this trade. You're giving me just a raw deal that you made up. Well, that's actually not the case, and that's why this is really, really cool. So let's go see what happened to you. So you now have 20 fish. So you have 20 fish, right? Because I traded you 20 fish. So you have 20 fish. And you had 50 potatoes, you gave me 30, so you now also have 20 potatoes. So let's go see where that puts us. Well, you have 20 fish, which is right here on this line, and you have 20 potatoes, which is right out here. So that is actually, because I haven't drawn it very well, that is actually outside your production possibilities curve also. And I'll go ahead and prove that to you numerically since I can't draw. But you also are richer. So you also are richer for trade. You have expanded your production possibilities curve. You're richer for trade. So let's go ahead and prove that. So you can produce 25 fish or 50 potatoes. So if you produce 20 fish, so let's go prove this. So go ahead and draw a line here. If you produce 20 fish, if you make 20 fish, you have the production, you have the ability to make 20 more fish. You have the ability to make 5 more fish, right? Because your total production was 25 fish. So you can make 5 more fish, or 10, that's equal to 10 potatoes, right? Because 1 fish is 2 potatoes for you, so 5 fish is equal to 10 potatoes. So going back down, you can make 20 fish and 10 potatoes. If you make 20 fish, you have extra time for 10 potatoes, for only 10 potatoes, let's say. For only 10 potatoes. But you now, just by trading with me, you have 20 potatoes. So you're better off by 10 potatoes than what you could produce domestically. just by trade. And so as long as you trade within, let me go ahead and write this down also. So let's write this over here on the trade side. So as long as you trade in between the range of opportunity costs, in between both nations' opportunity costs, everyone benefits. And so I went ahead and picked this 1.5, one fish for 1.5 potatoes, because that's in between our opportunity costs. So for me, one fish was one potato up here, and for you, one fish is two potatoes, so 1.5 is between 1 and 2. So I went ahead and picked that so that I could show you this cool example that how we are both better off for trade. And if you'd like, I can go show you that when you pick a number that is outside of that range, that we're both worse off, but this video is already pretty long as it is. So if you'd like that, let me know and I'll be happy to do that for you. So to recap, countries should specialize in the goods that they have a comparative advantage in and trade for everything else. And both countries will be better off. Both countries will be better off if you trade in between the range of both nations' opportunity costs. So if you get all of that, you are pretty set on this model. And if you don't, please let me know what you don't get, and I will be happy to go over it more in detail. All right, take care.